welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the asset-backed currency revolution. My name is James Glasscock. I'm with Reserve Protocol. I'm the head of ecosystem. Our mission is to help people access stable currencies around the world. I've got a little prompt, and then I'm going to ask you to meet my friend Jack here, and he can intro himself with the first question. I was thinking about what we were going to talk about today, and I wanted to kind of go a little deeper on what the mission around this conversation is. So I'll just read this. Apologies, it's not memorized. The current global monetary system separates store of value versus liquidity. We use fiat dollars because they are highly liquid, but they haven't been backed by assets since the United States quit the gold standard. This is having devastating effects all around the world, in places like Venezuela, Argentina, Lebanon, and Nigeria, to name a few. The basic idea of the asset-backed currency revolution is to be able to transact directly with our store of value. And for the first time, thanks to the work of Satoshi, Vitalik, and many of the people in this room and here in Denver, we can do that in a stable, transparent, and digital form. This is not just for people that want to make money or people that want to make change. It's all of the above. It's for the idealists, the heroes, and the capitalists. So with that being said, to build asset-backed currencies, you need tokenized assets. So excited to introduce my friend Jack, for you to introduce yourself actually. And to build these currencies, we're going to need these assets. Can you walk us through the state of affairs on tokenization progress and types?
Hello, yep, sure. So thanks for having me here, James. A bit intro about myself. My name's Jack, and I call myself a tokenization nerd. I very fortunate to co-authored a viral paper called An Unreal Primer into Real-World Assets, which had roughly 1 million reach on Twitter and close to 10K reach on a DocuSend, and also read by institutional asset managers, the likes of Fidelity, Franklin, Brevin Howard, etc. Alongside, for the past year, I was building Frake, responsible for the product and crypto side of things. So a lot of the challenges, a lot of the of our peers doing tokenization, I've seen the challenges. Some of them are unresolved. Some of them are slightly mitigated. So I'm really excited to be here to share with you all about some of the lessons learned and also some revisions to what I think about real-world assets will look like. And now going back to your question, James. So what is the state of affairs for tokenization? Now, if you go online, if you go on Google, Twitter, YouTube, etc., you will be bombarded by layer ones. Well, thank God this is EthDenver, not Solana Denver. There's plenty of layer ones out there that have made traction and pilot projects on tokenization. But let's take a step back and see what qualifies as tokenization, right? So tokenization is nothing new. It's nothing crypto exceptional. It happened in Web2 fintech as well, right? But briefly, it was called digitization. So the digitization of asset classes, right? When it comes to capital markets, different forms of financing asset classes, real estate. It could be even getting your lunch in a queue over there. Do you pay with cash? Do you pay with digital cash? Do you pay with stable coins? Do you pay with reserve currency? So tokenization, what it really is turning the representation and the ownership of the asset in a digital form. And when it comes to real-world assets tokenization, it means the underlying ledger, the underlying representation of the asset is on a blockchain. But it includes permission blockchain, the likes of consensus quorum, Corda, provenance, all the way slided the spectrum of permissionless, Ethereum, Solana, Avalanche, Polygon, etc. Now to close up my response to your question, James, there has been plenty of pilots recently, particularly for financial institutions to tokenize different asset classes on their balance sheet. So on a high level, right, we see Avalanche, Polygon, provenance. As of a few weeks ago, I thought you might find this funny, right? So Celsius is actually doing a restructuring, and they're tokenizing the debtor's claim on provenance. And by the way, I'm not paid by provenance, but if you work at provenance, maybe pay me for some marketing hours. But anyways, I thought that's interesting, right? Because now you can do something that usually involves hours of lawyers back and forth and put it in a digital form. So that's one. But I would close it with a comment and say, we're making traction, but most of the traction is from the sell side. So people trying to sell the assets in a tokenized form. Has there been traction in people buying assets in a tokenized form? That remains to be seen, and that's going to be something that I'll comment further throughout this talk as well.
Thank you, Jack. That's a really interesting segue, because as you were describing it, I was imagining the gap between that sell side and what we're trying to do in utilizing these tokenized assets. One of the challenges for building asset-backed currencies is you need assets to be tokenized. You need sufficient liquidity. What is sufficient liquidity? It might be hundreds of millions of dollars. It might be billions. It might even be lower. It could be 10 or 20 million. It depends on what you're trying to do. How do we bridge that gap between the sell side of different sort of marketers and tokenizing platforms to users of these assets? What do you think is missing in that gap?
Sure. So long story short, I think most of tokenization attempts are focusing on, we have a solution, let's find a problem to solve it, let's force fit the solution and find some user group. AKA, hey, we can tokenize an asset. Let's tokenize real estate, let's tokenize art, let's tokenize wine, without thinking who, on the other hand, are actually buying this, and why would they prefer buying it via crypto rails compared to traditional rails? That is the problem statement, in my opinion. Now, to get there, right, which means we need to start from pain points, start from the right user segment. So something I personally find interesting about Reserve is there's organic usage in LATAM, right? And you've built a community, you've built merchant users, which is very rare for crypto. I actually don't know if the lunch restaurant over there, if I can pay with USDC, but it's very likely that the POS system doesn't accept my USDC, right? And that's a pain point. We're in a crypto conference, and they're not accepting my crypto payments. Now, conversely, right, so once you have that organic usage on the ground, there's liquidity, then you figure out, right, what kind of demand do they have? Do they prefer to buy US financial products? Do they prefer tokenized gold, right? In certain, for example, in APAC, a more like slightly older user, they really like gold. And a large amount of wealth management products, WMP, in the traditional finance world, involves wrapping around precious metal as a savings vehicle. And if you figure out the right if you figure out the right end user, you can do it via crypto rails. But just don't start with crypto rails and then find and figure out some ways to sell your product to.
One of the things I've been both excited by and frustrated by in the space is back in 2018, there was a prominent movement around security tokens. It was kind of like the first wave cycle of this discussion, and then it didn't really go very far. Here we are kind of in a second wave conversation. Lots of TradFi folks are talking about it. When I read your real world assets primer, I was kind of blown away to see how many folks were active in the space. And then when the team started diving into how we might build currencies with very diverse baskets of these assets, something that could be stable over decades or centuries, not years, but a very long-term stable currency. That's kind of the North Star of what we're working toward. But then the frustration came in with realizing, there's maybe only about a total of $300 or $400 million of assets tokenized on chain today, and none of them specifically are sort of large chunks. So I'm curious, from your perspective, paying attention to the space of what's being tokenized, what are you most excited about for this year and next year? What do you think might be the assets that gain the most traction in this movement in the current time period?
Sure, yeah. So two dichotomies, two distinction. The first one is, and I'll briefly mention this first, and then I'll walk through it. The first one is what I like to call tool versus exchange. And the second one is on-chain versus off-chain. Let's look at the first one, tool versus exchange. I think there's plenty of protocols out there that are trying to do the job of originating asset, talking to borrowers, giving them loans, maybe even taking the risk and underwriting that loan, and then trying to package it, sell it to crypto users, or sell it to, or convince traditional finance investors to use crypto rails to invest in this. My personal opinion is that these protocols, in the long run, they're building a marketplace, right? And it's really tough. Like you can, flick through Bill Gurley's learnings on marketplaces. Aggregated demand is king. If you can aggregate demand, aka the demand for the asset, aka capital, then you win. Then we go back to the cycle, go back to the question. Where are the users? Why would they want to use crypto rails? Why would they want to buy you? Why would they want to buy the assets that you tokenized? And I think the current state of affairs we're facing is maybe an overemphasis on the narrative of selling to DAOs, an overemphasis of efficient processes of tokenization, which, to be frank, is actually not efficient. And this now comes to my second point, which is the on-chain versus off-chain. If, again, you look at recent attempts at tokenization, large part of it, they just tokenize the ownership. They tokenize the title of the asset. If you think about the flow of funds, what about the payments of interest? What about the payments of the principal? How does it accrue interest? How does it accrue yield? How is it done? It's still done manually via the issuer inputting a digit maybe in the smart contract, and then they pay it. None of it is automatic, right? So this relies on off-chain logic. A true potential for tokenization is where you can build on-chain representation for, let's say, fixed income asset derivatives that fully end-to-end from your pre-trade all the way to your post-trade life cycle, everything settles, happens on-chain. And this is what, if I'm talking in New York in DAS and Digital Asset Summit, the folks, they would say, oh, this is something called DLT, and you can replace administration agent, trustee, and payment agents. So that's something that I think we need to work on, and which ties back to my first point, right? So rather than building an exchange, build tools. Build tools that more easily onboard capital into digital asset, into crypto. I think there's plenty of borrowers out there that want capital, and it's great that a lot of emerging market projects are being financed, and I'm really passionate about those. But it's just in order to get like an evergreen adoption, right? Which is how can you get a fund to deploy 10 mil? How can we get like sticky user base similar to Robinhood, but like a crypto version of Robinhood where people put money in, or like interactive brokers, right? People put 100K, 500K onto that app. How can we get that? In order to do so, you need a tool first, and then you solve the pain points, and then you can slowly build out the exchange. This idea doesn't come from me. It comes from the it's inspired with the Andreessen fintech space as well. But I just think they put it in the fintech. They didn't apply it to real assets. I think now is ripe for the moment for us to apply this.
I want to talk a little bit about accessibility. We're here in Denver. Lots of us here might have access to all the good fintech services. But in different parts of the world, whether you're a user of the services or you're trying to access capital markets, it's much more challenging. There's folks who don't have accounts with Merrill Lynch and Wells Fargo and PayPal and Venmo. It's not very easy. We take it a little bit for granted here, but it's much more difficult in the developing world. Just as one example, I believe the elections in Nigeria were last week, and folks were protesting inside of the bank branches and in the streets. Very violent. I was told, do not visit anytime soon because it was so dangerous there. People are very frustrated with the government printing money, kind of changing out the paper money system. And then I know with this conversation, we're talking about asset-backed currency revolution, and it could sound very capitalist-centric, but when I originally connected with Jack, he was working on a green bond project for a hydropower plant in Rwanda. Yesterday, I heard about a project that is interested in tokenizing gold without digging it out of the ground and causing what is essentially a fairly chaotic natural disaster. So I wonder, Jack, if you could just speak to how important this is and why for the developing world, even though maybe in the United States it may be less important, which is totally okay. We're actually a minority here.
Sure, yeah. So I actually wrote a Twitter thread on this. So for the past few weeks, past few months, you might have seen, if you're active on crypto Twitter, there's a wave of protocols trying to tokenize treasury bills, right? Treasuries and corporates and ETFs, they have a limitation. You have to be a qualified investor, or you have to be a professional investor in whatever jurisdiction you're in. Think again. If you're qualified, if you're already a professional investor, why would you do it via crypto rails? It's very likely that you have a great JP Morgan Chase personal banker catering to your needs, right? Or even if you're mass affluent, if you've got more than 100K, you can open up an interactive broker's account in the US pretty easily. Now, my observation is, and this is something that I wrote in my thread as well, crypto is missing the opportunity to build a killer app. And one potential for this killer app is to go back to the origins, go back to the promise of DeFi, which is open finance, right? What does open finance mean? It means offering globally disadvantaged or underprivileged users or hard to access users access to financial products. And these financial products can be from the US, can be from Europe, can be from developed world. And what that would look like basically is, hey, look at, let me share with you my personal story, right? So I'm from Hong Kong, APAC. You'd have thought Hong Kong is a first world city, it's everything so advanced, skyscrapers, like New York copycat in Asia. But I recently moved to US. I'm banked in the US. And if I want to put my cash into treasuries, ETFs, because I'm a Hong Kong resident, right? So I open up a interactive broker's account, all that stock brokerage, bullshit, TBH. And how's it built, their product? It's built on 2008, 2009 Web 1.5 stack, where I have to submit a PDF of my proof of income, proof of residency. They don't even integrate with Persona, for example, which is a very famous, it's an identity fintech spin out from Square, where on your neobank, you can scan your ID, take a selfie, and you can do that KYC very easily. They don't have that. So there's a potential here, right? Which is now we can, because we have the Web 2.5 stack, and we even have Web 3 stack, right, for smart contract automation, composability of products. What we can build is rebuild this financial stack, so to speak, from your compliance, identity, settlement, on-off-ramp, analytics, even accounting. Rebuild this app, and you can sell it. You can get organic users in jurisdictions, in areas where people are not, they don't have access to. And I think an unfortunate truth is, right, something to bear in mind, something that's very humbling for me is, we're speaking in the US, right? US is the largest capital markets on earth, but it's also quite saturated. So as a builder or as an investor, it might make sense on a risk-adjusted reward basis to go after those. But then again, right, are you building a consumer fintech app, or are you building the infra to empower that? That could be something that, if you guys are hacking in this hackathon, you guys can play around, and you will get a gist. It's difficult to get users, but it's also difficult to get your B2B infra users as well. So I hope that's alpha leak.
Yeah, I want to dive back into kind of the technical aspects of what we're talking about. One of the exciting things in the Ethereum ecosystem is permissionlessness. And I've noticed some of the projects that are coming to market this year, the mindset of how they're coming to market is very different than some of the conversations that were happening in 2017 and 2018. They're using permissionless ERC20 tokens for these assets. And in some cases, you'll find these assets trading in the secondary markets on DEXs. And so I'm just curious, Jack, from your perspective, what do you think that could unlock this time around? Because there was a lot of high hope and ambition in 2018, and then it just kind of went quiet. Maybe this time is different. I'm curious, what do you think permissionless could unlock for all these other parts of the world and different users?
Sure. So that's a very tricky question, right? So I've got a two-sided opinion on this. On the one hand, securities regulation is not going to go away. There is a reason why they are in place. Look, there's a moral case, there's a legal case, there's a political case. I'm not going to it, but very unlikely that security tokens are not going to receive, they're going to go wildcat, right? Back to wildcat banking. That's not going to happen. But we are living in a different time compared to 2018. In 2018, all the infra isn't there. Right? What does it mean to be infra? People talk about infra. And this is going to be something I'm going to mention, that's something I'm going to write on in my second primer coming soon, which is really mapping out the different layers of the institutional digital asset or / DeFi stack, right? Back in 2018, think about on-off ramps. damn, Circle is still an OTC, right? There's no USDC. You on-ramp to USDT via some dodgy tier 3 exchange offshore. Now you have USDC, now you have USDP as well. That's one. Think about wallet infrastructure. There's no MPC. There's no account abstraction back in the days. MPC is now largely in place. Fireblocks is pretty sticky. Account abstraction is going soon, right? As of today, the EIP passed. So that's a new frontier for us. So the infra is different, but the regulation will still be in place. And so I think what's interesting for us right now is to tackle the right use cases. So personally, what I'm bullish on for the permissionless nature is pick the low-hanging fruits. So, if you look at private assets, private market assets, what I used to build, right? So energy infrastructure that are institutionally invested. It's largely paperwork and unpenetrated. Even the asset managers, they don't have a 10-year software vendor contract with some Web 1.5, Web 2 company. That's ripe to disrupt. If you want to do tokenized shares, I think that's going to be difficult. And I think there's a reason why, like FTX, if you look at the bankruptcy filing, they actually never offer you tokenized stock. They did a contract for difference, CFD. So the acquisition of digital asset, that was a PSYOP. And that speaks to how difficult it is to actually get meaningful user. If you're tackling something that's fairly well used in traditional finance or in the conventional world. So long story short, do something, build a product that offers a 10x value proposition for your existing users. Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned FTX. One of probably everyone in the room's frustrations of the last year were with FTX and Celsius and several other players in the space is lack of transparency, lack of proof of reserves. And that is also one of the things that really keeps us going, keeps us super excited. If we had only been ready a couple of years before, maybe some type of parts of those situations could have been prevented. I think this is really interesting. We talk about tokenizing assets and putting them on chain and building asset-backed currencies that have proof of reserves on chain, where anyone can look at those reserves anytime and decide, do I want to be a part of this or not? It's a very different opportunity and conversation than what you're hearing from centralized institutions. Jack, would you just talk a little bit about, kind of from your perspective on the tokenization side, how you see the world of proof of reserves playing out, especially since a lot of the tokenization of real-world assets is kind of going to be fragmented for a while, some parts of it off-chain, some parts of it on-chain. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, sure. So it depends on how you define POR and how you implement it, how you execute it. Is it via Oracle surface? Is it like something that what Sexes do with a proof of reserve? I'll actually not answer that question because to be frank, I don't know. I don't see much catalyst driving that, but I just want to make maybe one quick comment. So I think asset-backed currency will face a regulatory tailwind. It will be difficult to get users. Have you guys heard of BIS, Bank of International Settlement? There was a meme on crypto Twitter earlier where there's like a fat, tall guy saying, "Oh, crypto, you've lost against fiat." Right, that's PSYOP. But what he's actually saying, there's a new project with CBDC, and even scarier, cross-border. Well, not scary, but take it as a neutral way. But cross-border CBDC. So China, there's a thing called Project Stable, right? Where they're using they call it MCBDC, where they can settle from Chinese yuan into the largest trading partner, could be Dubai, or could be with UAE's, or could be Saudi Riyadh. They can settle it without any dollar denomination. So what it means is basically you can bypass SWIFT, right? And so think about what if China gets sanctioned, if it supports weapons to Ukraine. Look, this is not a geopolitical panel. I'm not going to go into details. But the point I'm trying to make is we need to tell the Western capital markets and financial regulators that a large part of crypto is denominated in USD. Now there's an incumbent challenger coming up that can reduce the hegemony of USD, right? And so there is a play, there is an angle where since large amounts of asset classes from private to public is still denominated in USD, it makes sense. If you put them on chain, then you do some form of tokenized cash, tokenized deposit, right, which is what JPM has with the Onyx, or stablecoin, Circle, pesos, whatever that is, or even provenance with a consortium. And you increase adoption, and then you get Venezuelan, you get Russian, you get Ukrainian, you get Iranian. I mean, the funny side point, right? Like USDT on Tron is heavily used in LATAM and Iran and Russia, and I think that's a reason, and that's product market fit of USD. I'm not a Bitcoin maxi, not a USD maxi, but I just think the reality, the truth is, that's a boat, that's a wave that we can ride on. Let's just ride on it, get as much traction as we can. And then after that, we think about, should we do something like RAI, right? Like free floating, ETH-backed, or something like what Endgame is doing with MakerDAO, with free floating DAI. It's called Endgame for a reason, is at the end. We've only gotten started.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned kind of different currency denominations. You know, when we talk about asset-backed currencies or stable coins, people often just think we're talking about a peg dollar stablecoin. And oftentimes, since Tether and USDC have about 90% market share, folks think of centralized stablecoins like that. But meanwhile, now we have a number of stablecoins that are pegged to Ethereum. You've got some that are pegged to the consumer price index. I think it's just a really interesting way to think. You know, this phenomena of the USD peg is only a few hundred years old. It might go another few hundred. Maybe it'll go 1,000, maybe not. But it's kind of a phenomena of kind of pre-digital era, much less pre-crypto. So I just think it's a really interesting way for people to think about asset-backed currencies. I know we're about to run out of time. At the end, I'm gonna show you guys what our work looks like in Latin America. But I wanna give Jack kind of last word. What question do you wish I had have asked you that I didn't? And go ahead.
I think I'll probably leave a few comments since I feel like I've been a bit too harsh on the crypto crowd. I'm just devil's advocate, right? But to be optimistic, things I'm really bullish on is I think DeFi needs a killer app, right? And this killer app can be consumer facing, can be enterprise facing, where it can onboard more institutions involved. And these institutions, they cannot be another market maker, no offense. No more trading firm, please. Actually think about crypto, think about blockchain as a software for capital markets. And I hope that this framing is a lot more generic and it opens up the solution space, right? And I'm also bullish on builders trying out new things. They do like on-chain distribution of funds, ZK, so things like Renegade, right? ZK, MPC. And in 3 to 5 years' time, institutions are going to pick up. Look at Project Guardian. It took JP Morgan and Onyx and Monetary Authority of Singapore, I think maybe 3 to 4 years to actually conduct a on-chain transactions on the Aave. So if we can do ZK now, maybe they will do it in 3 years' time. And then when they do it in 3 years' time, maybe that's ripe for product market fit. But as builders, you got to be early, right? You got to build a pre-PMF. So let's build.
Awesome. I'm going to show you guys what I think the bridge looks like. Some work we've been doing in Latin America. Regular people using crypto to do very basic things like shop with merchants, peer-to-peer payments, remittances, and many of which don't really know they're using stable coins. But let's see if this works.